Okay, looks like live once again. And after a little bit of technical issues, I tried to go live like 3 or 4 times, but it really wouldn't let me. But it looks like it's finally working now. And had to play around with my camera a little bit because for some reason, depending on the settings, it made me look really red, which I don't know why that is, or it was really dark, even though I'm in a fairly well lit room. So here we go. But in this particular live stream, I want to go over an article that I put together this morning that's based on an idea that I've been working on for quite a while, and I may have mentioned in some capacity in previous live streams. And that's this whole concept of plausible deniability, and basically calling it the masters of maybe, the art of basically never taking a real position on anything. And I want to talk about this because I see it as something that I've seen and observed in myself and in a lot of people that really holds them back and keeps people in sort of a doom loop where they stay stuck and just sort of repeating the same things, or they just keep creating outcomes for themselves that are dysfunctional, whether that's in relationships or their career or creative endeavors or within their health or whatever it might be. It's something that I've seen to be true time and time again. And I've just now been able to really articulate it, I think, in a pretty clear way. A great example of this sometimes is basically trying to think how to word this the best way, but if you're not familiar with the concept of plausible deniability, it's the way I'm talking about it now is people will never really make their intentions or their desires or their thoughts clear and out there, meaning like, here's what I think, here's why, take it or leave it, right? I think many people avoid that because of the risk that it involves. They avoid it because of the responsibility, the accountability, and the vulnerability that is required. However, that juncture or that intersection point is what fosters and allows connection. That's what allows creativity. That's what allows growth or progress in almost any real endeavor in life. So therefore, if we are people that are interested in any of those outcomes, then that intersection or that juncture is going to be of particular importance to us. And it would also follow that if we avoid those things, then subsequently we'll block ourselves or at least greatly diminish or hinder those outcomes. And like I said, I've seen it time and time again, whether it's health, people in dating, people in their career, people with creative endeavors, people with expressing themselves. And a lot of it just comes down to those things. And just as a point of contrast, talking about this context in particular and something I can relate to very personally in terms of YouTube is basically the whole format of this channel over the last however many years it's been, 15 years, is basically just sort of been the same, where I'm here as a person, as me, authentically and honestly just saying, here's what I think, here's why I think it, here's how I got there, here's why I think it's beneficial, take it or leave it. And that's pretty much it. No false pretense of pretending to be someone else or pretending to be trying to save humanity or pretending to hide behind some image of like, oh, I'm so conscious and I did 27 ayahuasca ceremonies and this cosmically downloaded. No, not really. Just basically saying, using the tools of basic rationality, basic logic, basic reasoning functions, looking at things and arriving at things, testing them, looking at the outcomes, and then moving forward based on that. Because if we look at what has allowed humans to evolve, progress, survive, thrive, build civilization, solve problems, it's those things predominantly. Reason, rationality, logic, structured, ordered thinking, critical thinking, deduction, evidence, all sorts of things. That's what allowed humans to develop. But there's a real push nowadays, and especially as it pertains to plausible deniability and these things, to go away from those things and to somehow go and just go into disorder and chaos and relativity and subjectivity and break everything down, and in essence go backwards, which doesn't really make any sense. And the majority of the time, people either stay stuck or end up right back where they started, which I've told stories about that before, with the guy that refused to wear shoes because they were oppressive. And then after 2 days of not wearing shoes, his feet were destroyed from walking around the city. And then he wondered, man, what if I could just put something on my foot to protect my foot? And it's like, yeah, shoes. That's what that's about. No, not shoes. They're oppressive, and just kept going around in those circles. My point is, and my way of thinking is, life is short, time is valuable. So why waste it on things that have already been solved, already been figured out, already been pressure tested by so many people, when you can leverage and utilize other people's time, energy, basically wisdom? You can use that and move and apply it to your life and move forward, which always becomes interesting when you go into personal development or spiritual kind of worlds, where people will pay lip service to these ideals about life being a gift and life being magical and all these things. But then it's like, okay, I agree, but wouldn't you want to actually apply those ideals and things and actually maybe try to embody those qualities to some capacity, using the low-hanging fruit of whatever skills that we can access as human beings, that then sure maybe someday can lead to something beyond or greater? But if you can't tie your shoes, then it doesn't really make a lot of sense to talk about running marathons as such. So ultimately, the plausible deniability thing comes down to fear of being fully seen and actually rejected, which the irony of that is, by hiding, people guarantee that they'll basically never be truly accepted. So they end up, having situations where they're surrounded by people, but they feel alone, or they get into a relationship and then the relationship ends in this place where they never even would have agreed to. And the fact of the matter is, they're mystified, so they want to go and do some sort of pathology with psychology and all these things. But in reality, if they could be more pragmatic and look at all the little decisions that they made that led them to that place, and that it usually wasn't one big decision, it was a bunch of little ones, like death by 1,000 cuts ultimately. And usually what that comes down to is wanting to avoid discomfort, meaning people would choose to rather avoid a potentially uncomfortable conversation that might last 90 seconds to 5 to 10 minutes, and instead choose years, decades, or a lifetime of just low-grade suffering, discomfort, depression, anxiety, apathy, and ultimately when they die, look back at their life and think like, wait, what happened? And to me, that sounds kind of sad. So I would prefer to avoid that and thereby actually engage with things now and be willing to take risks and be willing to stand on my own 2 feet as best I can with the information and the tools that I have to try and move forward. And the point that I'm making, and what I'll be getting into with this plausible deniability thing, is that's ultimately what people are afraid of doing and will avoid doing, and will do everything in the world to avoid that simple thing. When if they actually just did that simple thing, then a lot of the stuff that they're doing wouldn't even be necessary or required. Or if they actually did do it, their results would be exponentially more efficient. So as it pertains to relationship or things about spirituality, it's ultimately coming back to people wanting to always kind of keep things a bit fuzzy or a bit vague or a bit relativistic or a bit sentimental and emotional. The reason why people like that is because it allows them to redefine terms as they go along, or allows them the plausible deniability and the self-image reputation management. Meaning, for example, someone could be really non-committal, really scattered, really unfocused, right? And instead they could just say, oh, well, I'm just in an exploration mode. And it's like, well, no, you're just scattered, disorganized, chaotic. And the reason why you feel like you need to explore is very likely caused by you being that way. And if you actually just got organized and structured, then all of that stuff would actually probably go away. It ends up creating this sort of hilarious outcome where the thing people are doing to avoid the thing is the thing causing the reason why they feel like they have to do the thing in the first place. And it happens with so much therapy stuff and psychedelic and like weed smoking and even stuff in relationships. So another great example, and I think I alluded to this in the last live stream about relationships, is a lot of people, especially in these types of arenas, will have a really strong self-image of being a healer or being a therapist or being this person who more or less mistakes sensation and emotional instability for depth or wisdom or insight or skill, when in actuality it's not those things. They just have their wires crossed a little bit. And so what ends up happening is they have this sort of image, right? So they have to filter all the relationships through that image. And then 99% of the time they end up feeling like, oh, well, especially if they're female, like men aren't deep enough, men are too simple, men aren't doing the work, men are fill in the blank of like excuses, so they're not emotionally available. And it's like, well, literally no one is, because number one, you're operating through plausible deniability and reputation management and just almost exclusively worried about how things make you feel. And the problem with that is that that's not a recipe or a foundation for success in connecting with other human beings in an effective way, nor is it a way of actually connecting with yourself in any real capacity. It's a doom loop. It is a very dysfunctional way of being. But what happens is there's all these sort of escape hatches and loops that people have where they can take on an image that appears a certain way and allows them to use certain words and sort of wear certain costumes and cosplay. And because a certain percentage of everyone else is also equally checked out and superficial, no one really notices. So what happens is their relationships end up being this exchange of, you validate my nonsense and smile and nod, but not really hear what I'm saying. And then I'll do the same for you. And then we'll feel like, wow, you just totally get me. And it's like, well, no, neither of you are getting anything. You're just sort of almost psychologically using each other as dildos and getting each other off. And it's ultimately not fulfilling, which is why usually they feel unfulfilled. They have anxiety, they have depression, they have to take psychedelics, they have to microdose, they have to get on mood stabilizers and antidepressants, and absolutely have all of these pressure release valves and all these sort of coping mechanisms just to deal with their regular life, which is probably, in a grand historical sense, easy, convenient, simple, almost like probably luxurious, like things that even kings and queens and such only a very short while ago couldn't even dreamed of. But it fundamentally comes back to this idea of plausible deniability, where people want to skip it's like they want to have their cake and eat it too, again, is another really simple way to put it, where it's like, I want all these outcomes in life, but I don't want any of the risk, vulnerability, responsibility, accountability that goes along with that. And the thing is, that's simple. Humans figured that out a really long time ago, but it's again one of these things that people in their disassociated, fractured state forget really simple, obvious things. Why? Because they can't actually interact with life in that real, tangible level. Why? Because they're operating in this way of filtering everything through, oh, this makes me feel this way, and I got to maintain this reputation, I got to maintain this self-image, I got to be this particular way and filter everything through that. And ultimately, my point is that that's not ever going to be fulfilling, and it will only lead to dissatisfaction, and it will make people very profitable for all the institutions that want to exploit them, whether it's dating apps or social media or the therapy industrial complex or pharmaceutical industry or perverted, distorted sexual indulgences, all of those things. These people are ripe customers. It's almost like stealing someone's wallet and selling it back to them. And I'm quite confident and strongly believe that what I'm talking about in this actual intersection juncture point is really a big piece of it. Obviously, it's not all of it, because People have different lives and can be intricacies and nuances and things that we perhaps can't anticipate. But this is something that is impactful enough, common enough, that would make a really large, sizable difference. And I think in actuality would probably get rid of a lot of the issues chronically that people deal with. And a lot of it just goes back to this very simple idea. And I guess just as a point of contrast, to make it a bit more personal, I can say, again, going back to my YouTube example, because I'm literally on YouTube at the moment, people will come in on the chat or come in comments. They'll be anonymous or they'll be whatever, and just say a bunch of, drive-by, pretty, let's just say unsavory things or inaccurate things, right? Which is very easy to do in that instance. Or they'll want to, or sometimes people will be like, oh, interview me for your channel. And it's like, well, you just want to take advantage of my asset. No, I really think it would be good. And they do this whole spiel about why it's going to be good for me and all these things, when in reality, it's just good for them and it's their beneficial thing. But still, they're still hiding behind this sort of anonymous keyboard attachment. My point is that the way I've always tried to do things is basically, here's what I think and why, and then take the consequences, good or bad. And I can tell you unequivocally that, for example, the article I was talking about on Friday or whatever that I posted, multiple people wrote me essays being like, just basically full of fallacy and emotional reactivity, and then blocking me, which is the exact dynamic that I wrote out in detail, specifically in the article. So they just confirmed the hypothesis in real time, as I anticipated it would, which sort of just confirmed the whole thing to begin with. So my point is that if you actually, I think, mature in this capacity and be willing to interface with these things and stop living through plausible deniability and these sort of doom loops, it's not necessarily always going to be positive, because you'll quickly realize that a lot of people don't actually live in that way. And I would say most people probably don't. I would say maybe a lot of successful people could be exceptions, because like I said, it's the only way to really do anything or grow or improve. And if what I'm saying is not true, because I understand that it could be uncomfortable or seem like a lofty thing, I'll give you crystal clear evidence for it. So en masse, if you were to ask most people, they would say they're modern, they're advanced, they're rational, they're logical, they're intelligent, and, they're not reactive. And they would also say that throughout history, they would have been on the right side of things. If they lived through the People's Revolution in China, if they lived through Nazi Germany, if they lived through the gulags and such in Russia, they would have been part of the resistance. They wouldn't have been on the side of the oppressors. They would have been on the right side of things. And these are people that would say, well, all these politicians are corrupt, but basically, if I was there, then I would be better and I would do it better. These are common things that people would think, right? And you would get into their image. And obviously there can be variations on it. People think, well, I'm very spiritual, I'm very religious because I do these things, or I'm very moderate because I do these things, or I'm a free thinker because I don't know, do whatever. Like I'm saying, just a bunch of examples of self-images and such that people have, and they feel all these things, right? So that's what people say and what they think. What people do and what people respond to is how you actually see more of what they actually are. So the same people who will say all of these things are the same people who respond to basically guzzling the countless falsehoods from institutions without question, categorically, probably for their entire life, based on just emotional reactivity. I mean, institutional capture, institutional deception, flat out. There's nothing else to call it other than just straight up deception. And most of these kinds of people will just swallow it wholeheartedly. Why? Tribal alliance, emotional reactivity, and it might support their self-image because they can say, oh, well, I'm in this group, so I'm better than that group. Or I feel good here, so I have an enemy now. So they just basically develop all these things while telling themselves that they're advanced and they're moderate and they're kind and they're compassionate. Great example of this is in America during the COVID pandemic, you had predominantly one side of the political spectrum that calls themselves the party of the people, the party of the oppressed, the party of compassion, the party of health freedom and body autonomy. Yet overnight, that all went out the window. So that degree of moral inconsistency and intellectual dishonesty and straight up just deception and vile, shameful behavior because the TV told them to, starts to reveal a little more of what's actually going on underneath the surface. So I can even say in my own real trivial, small scale examples, I even made videos about this years ago, about base desires and about conditioning. And the images that I used were like a woman in a bikini with, let's say, a flattering body. And categorically, those all performed better than ones that didn't. And then people were angrily in the comments being like, oh my God, this is clickbait. Oh my God, you're so da 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 da. And I'm like, dude, the fact that the stats on my dashboard are what they are prove the thesis of the video. And the fact that you're in here butthurt and making these like emotional fallacies against me because of a video that's pointing out a dynamic that you're acting out in real time, that's supported by the actual demographics, that's larger, that's illustrating a much larger thing. It's almost a degree of irony and cosmic humor that makes my head stop. It just makes my brain go. So my point is that a lot of millions and millions of people all over the world, whatever country it was in, would have these sorts of, especially America actually, would have these really positive images of themselves. But if you look at their actual behavior, their decision-making process, you look at actually their life, oftentimes you'll see the opposite is actually true. And there's many controversial applications of this, which I won't get into, but if you're a curious person, this is a very fascinating aspect of human behavior to get into, looking at what people actually say versus what they actually do and what they actually respond to. Another great example of this would be possibly controversial to some is the big disparity in the dating marketplace in a lot of Western countries right now, where what females say they want is not what they actually respond to. And this is very well established, very, very easy to observe. But I won't really get into it because it's outside of the scope of the video, but trust that I've written a 50-page article about that specific thing that was referenced with 150 citations and references, because I knew what I was saying was possibly controversial in that piece. So I was like, let's just triple down and absolutely source and cite everything to the nth degree so that it's, in essence, pretty unequivocal. So, yeah. Let me get back to my outline here, because I think what I'm saying, this point I'm trying to make, I had a different, better way of going about it. Hold on, I'll be right back here. Yeah, I can't really find the article that I was trying to find, but my point was that in general, if you look at the self-images a lot of people have at scale, their behavior and their actions usually contradict it, and what they actually respond to. So what I mean is, if people really were as logical and non-reactive and progressive and enlightened and conscious and aware and compassionate and empathetic and evolved and modern and tolerant as they think they are, then number one, the media institution as it stands wouldn't be the way that it is. Number two, social media wouldn't be the way that it is. Society wouldn't be the way that it is. The education system wouldn't be the way that it is. The political system wouldn't be the way that it is. The healthcare system wouldn't be the way that it is. The dating marketplace wouldn't be the way that it is. But the fact that it is those things, you start to ask, well, why and how did it get there? Well, again, what people say and then what they do and what they respond to, oftentimes very different things. The proof is in the pudding, as they say. But for some reason, if you just observe what's actually real in the world, then that gets you labeled as all of these sort of diminishing, diminutive terms that people go to out of emotional reactivity, and they respond in extremely predictable fallacies and pivots and deflections in almost like a very toddler level of functioning, because what I'm saying is true. If it wasn't true, then things wouldn't be that way and they wouldn't respond in that way. But because they do, it's because of those things. It's not particularly that complicated or mysterious. It's just really rudimentary logic, rationality, reasoning, structured thought, observation. It's not particularly difficult. So yeah. Let's see. So I think, again, just to recap and summarize what I was saying about plausible deniability, which is basically the point of this particular live stream, is that when people behave in this particular way, they, in essence, almost guarantee that they will be stuck and that they will not achieve any of the outcomes that they want, which to me seems like kind of a bummer. Seems like maybe not a great thing. So maybe seems like something people would not really want to do, or maybe learn a different way of going about it, because they want the rewards, but they want to skew the risk. They want to skew the responsibility, the accountability, and the vulnerability that's required. For example, there's a lady that I'm friends with who has really struggled on dating apps, right? And I met her, we were friends, and I was telling her, your profile doesn't match who you actually are whatsoever. So have you ever considered that maybe that could be part of the reason why all the guys you're matching with are not even remotely a good fit for you, because the image you're putting out is not how you actually are and what you actually want. There's a big disconnect. And then I actually gave her crystal clear advice and analysis. Do these things, very simple, very straightforward. And I think it will be much better, because the person that you'll be representing on this profile of yourself is actually much closer. Obviously, that's not the entirety of it, because it's a stupid profile, but it's much closer to who you actually are. And it will filter out the wrong people and pull in the right people. And she's like, oh no, dating sucks and I hate the apps, and I don't know, I'm just busy and I can't do this and I can't do that. And it just got really uncomfortable. And then I'm like, yeah, there's that avoidance. I'm like, the thing you actually want from a person in a relationship, you're guaranteeing will never happen, because what you actually want is to genuinely be seen by someone else and feel comfortable in yourself and have that relation and that exchange with another person. But because you're not willing to take the risk, you're not willing to step out of the plausible deniability, you'll never achieve it. So all people will relate to is this fake version of yourself that's not really you. So of course that will never be satisfying. You'll always feel kind of off, and the things will never click. And because people are interacting with a fake version of yourself that's based on fear and anxiety. And I just see quite a lot of people, especially females, that's how they are, because they like the plausible deniability, because they don't want to admit that perhaps they might be at fault, or they might be insufficient, or they might be adequate, or maybe they just need to make a couple tweaks. It might even really be that, not even be that deep. It might be really simple. It might just be a couple little tweaks and things will be fine. But that's all too risky and too scary, because it's easier to just be like, society sucks, dating sucks, men are suck, blah, 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 excuse, I'm too busy, I can't have time, da, 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 and then say that, and then a week and a half later, back on it, back doing the thing, and just insanely repeating the same stuff over and over and over again, expecting different results. And I think in essence, at scale, in mass, that's the bulk of online dating behavior, is exactly that thing. And you have more and more, unfortunately, you have more and more division starting to happen. It's just the fact of the matter is, the division on one side of the camp is supported by institutional capture through education system, college, social media, therapy, and that whole doom loop. And again, they're also stuck in this exact mechanic that I'm talking about. And it's a doom loop that will basically destroy the fabric of our society. Because people might say, get butthurt about things I'm saying. Well, why do you care? Why are you talking about this? I mean, why are you so worried about what other people do? It's like, I don't know. I live in a world, because these are the same people who will be like, I'm really compassionate and I care. I'm interested in oneness and consciousness and spirituality and higher thinking, and I love psychedelics and therapy and personal improvement, and it's all love, and it's all, I'm like, okay, well then how would you not care if the house that you're in is burning down and it's actually completely preventable and people don't have to do it? So then the fact that they don't care means either they don't really believe those things, or maybe they're just burying their head in the sand hoping it go away, or maybe they're operating in exactly the mechanisms that I've been talking about for the last half an hour, where they don't actually want to stand for something. They don't actually want to be vulnerable or accountable for anything. So they want to exist in a safe little gray area and kind of drop little breadcrumbs that other sort of hypnotized people that are emotionally kind of salivating at those words will validate for them, but not ever actually look beneath the surface to see if it's actually real or authentic or actually true. It's again going back to that, like, validate my delusion and I'll validate your delusion, and we'll never actually connect and never actually communicate and never actually do anything real. Just this weird surface level dysfunction. And that's ultimately all that it is. It's a very surface level way of being that is inherently a form of dysfunction that creates more dysfunction. And again, it's nothing new. It's not a revelation. People have known this for a long time. It's just basic components of like being an adult that for some reason seem scarce these days, which is odd and sad, but that's really where we're at nowadays. So yeah, I just wanted to re-summarize and kind of bring that point home again, because it's really important. And I think people would be better off if they stopped waiting for permission or stopped waiting for a pat on the head from people and stopped living in a state of needing constant validation from outsiders, because that's how children function. My assumption is that hopefully people can be adults to some degree, as best we can, depending on our circumstances and other variables, because that's all we can ever do is, the best we can with what we have. But that's what I would hope. But ultimately, there seems to be a pretty strong vested interest in keeping people out of that state, keeping people dysfunctional, keeping people easily exploitable and stuck in dysfunctional, childish states, always looking to outside authorities, always looking to all these things and having to take drugs and take all these substances and do all these coping mechanisms while thinking that it's progress when it's actually regress. And just having their whole reality, in essence, inverted, kind of like some straight up 1984 Brave New World sort of thing. But the thing is, they're actively doing it and choosing to do so, but then blaming everyone else, when it's like, actually, you could just do these few things and that would maybe make a big difference. And I think, going back to what one of the questions that I heard you say, modern therapy isn't helpful, what do you recommend in place of that? Literally this is what I'm talking about. Because it's not that I say that modern therapy isn't helpful, because there's certain instances that it is. What are those instances? Instances that operate under the frameworks that I'm talking about here, and then actually break through them and allow people to mature as adults and be able to stand on their own 2 feet and function. And though that's unfortunately the exception rather than the norm, because of institutional capture through ideology and primarily really emotional, bitter women who need endless validation from the world. So they created these institutions to validate themselves and basically allow themselves escape hatches for their own dysfunction. And I know that's like a mouthful and a word salad, but like I said, I wrote two 50-page, so maybe 100 pages about that exact thing with 150 sources and citations, because I was like, well, this is a lofty claim here. Let me just double, triple, quadruple check and really pressure test it to make sure. The fact of the matter is, it's true. That's why the world is the way it is right now. That's why people are the way that they are right now. And that's why things are so screwed up, because these certain baseline things have been sort of purposefully or maybe just ignorantly removed from the conversation. So my point being, if someone did go to therapy and it was helpful, I can almost guarantee you it's because it was more pragmatic and goal-oriented, meaning you walked in on day one, and maybe after the first few sessions, you established, okay, this is what we want to do. These are our goals. This is our, we want you to have these skills. We want you to have these qualities. We want you to be able to do these things in the world for real and have, resiliency or self autonomy or maturity or stability or whatever quality it might be, or improve your communication or something, some basic life skill. And then you have someone that you trust that knows you, that helps you work through that and gives you an objective opinion. And then that would be a thing. And then eventually you're done. And then you move on and you go through your life. Again, that's the exception, not the norm. The norm is usually endless. Basically, the norm is coming from the fact that therapy in the modern time is by women for women, to, in essence, validate all of their issues and their way of functioning and eschew them of any responsibility, accountability, while basically the mechanics that I'm talking about here of plausible deniability and reputation management. And I know that's a tall, lofty claim that might seem counterintuitive, it might seem offensive, but it's actually true. And how is it true? Well, if there was something, an institution that had a big impact that was, I don't know, 80%, 90% run by men, and then the people that were going to it was also 80, 90% men, you would assume that's by men for men. And especially if it was completely geared and functioned around how they function and how they see the world and what's maybe a little more advantageous for them. That's an easy deduction. That's an easy W. That's an easy thing to arrive at. But the fact that if I say that about the opposite, everyone gets a little bit uncomfortable and uneasy, and then the emotions start bubbling, and then the fallacies and the disbelief. Where's your sources? Where does this? Where does that? All the defensiveness and the liver rising, and just the conflict arising inside of people. That just proves what I'm saying is true. If it wasn't true, if I'm like, the moon is made of cheese and this water is, I don't know, made of diamonds, that's not going to get any emotional reaction out of anyone, because it's patently, obviously false. But if I start saying things like that are objectively, obviously true, supported by a ton of data, a ton of actual real world things that anyone could look at if they actually desired to, then all of a sudden, that just proves the thesis or the hypothesis itself. And so in essence, that's why I'm saying I'm not particularly a big fan of it, because I just look at the outcomes that it produces on average. I look at the outcomes that it produces on society and culture the attitudes and behaviors that it engenders in people, and I can arrive at a pretty confident stance that it's actually not a good thing and it's taking people in the exact wrong direction. How can I say that? Basically, every measurable metric of a functional society is going down. Basically, every measurable thing about people's well-being has gotten worse since these sorts of things have been more widely adopted. It's not that complicated and it's not that difficult to see. It's just when you're so institutionally captured in your thoughts and your resources and your way of looking at the world is so conditioned, let's say, then certain things your mind will not even go to, and all the emotional reactivity will come up, and then, oh, well, how he's a bad guy and he's mean and he's judgmental and he's arrogant, he doesn't know what he's talking about, or he's a fill in the blank ism. And it's like, no, none of those things are true. You're just butthurt about something that's probably very true, and that's why it's creating that type of reactivity. And people can look it up for themselves. You can also walk out in the world for yourself and take a gander and see that it's abundantly obviously true. So anyways, just trying to answer that question about why I said modern therapy isn't helpful and what I recommend in place of that. What I recommend in place of that personally is first, just use common sense. I mean, I don't know you. I don't know anything about you. Some people absolutely need that type of thing and that type of intervention. Some people are better off with psychiatric medication and things of these natures. Like, obviously, be sensible, use some common sense and make the best decision for yourself and what's appropriate for you. Don't listen to just random people on the internet that don't know you. And then the other thing is, what I recommend is what I'm talking about here and what I've talked about in a bunch of live streams and a bunch of videos, because that's why I talked about it and that's what I've recommended. And I've talked about it at length. So yeah, hopefully that makes sense. But how did your face readings go? It was fun. I'm still offering it. It's still on Etsy. I think I did 10, 15-ish, maybe more. And I think they went pretty well. And so far, the people that I've heard back from were pleased and thought that it was quite accurate and quite helpful and useful. In terms of, some esoteric stuff that seemed like, 5-element lingo and some sort of TCM terminology that might not sort of make sense to people, but then also giving very crystal clear, simple, basic, applicable now, nitty-gritty advice, or not advice, but suggestions, let's say, based on the reading. So I think in general, the readings can be freakily accurate. I've had definitely, I won't say all of them, but because I've done, I don't know, 100 or more, I don't know, a ton over the last year in general before I ever talked about it publicly. And I mean, 90, 95, 98% of the time, it's like freakily accurate. And for me personally, it was quite useful. And for people that I know as well, it's been very useful and very accurate as well. But yeah. Other question is, do you listen to music? I don't really ever listen to music at all, but I used to. Or no, I take it back. The only time I ever listen to music is if I'm in a grocery store that usually has really crappy music. So I'll put on my AirPods and put on something on my YouTube music. But I'll pull up my YouTube music now and I'll tell you what's on there. Here we go. Looks like Hotel Pools is one. Hotel Pools and Tycho. There's a couple of bands, I guess, that I would recommend, depending on what your preferences are. Yeah. Noodle says, the pattern I see is outsourcing of components of our self-regulation are being outsourced to centralized authorities. Then they sell us back added on packages. Yeah, I mean, that's pretty accurate. And that's, in essence, how what I was saying earlier about how people actually function versus what they say, as evidenced by how the how the world actually is, versus the comfortable lies perhaps that people tell themselves. Trying to find what I wrote about that because it's pretty apt to this what we're talking about. Problem is I just get too many threads going at the same time and I just don't remember what's what. But yeah, I think that's a pretty spot on sort of thing. But I guess the biggest, a really easy example of that is just the appeal to authority, where whether it's like what happened with COVID or what happens with science, it's really just appeal to authority bias for people. It's just like, I don't really care. I just want to look informed and look a certain way, or I just want to be emotionally reactive. So I'm going to look at this headline and, okay, this authority said it, so it must be true. Okay, moving on. But it's like usually those authorities just blatantly lie. I mean, just in the last few days alone, I can't tell you the amount of just blatant lies in my limited time on social media that I've seen on the news and stuff. And then people just gobbling it up wholeheartedly. So that's definitely something that's outsourced, but also at the same time, it's more resource efficient. And I think it also just reveals more about how humans actually are and how they actually function. And the normal thing for humans is to sort of be like dogs. If you ever see a group of dogs, like there's usually the one leader dog and everyone else kind of follows around that dog and kind of just is looking to what they're going to do. That's kind of how people are at a certain scale. Obviously, individually, whatever, it's different, but at a certain scale, that's really how we all function because we're social animals. And I think that's pretty well established. And you can just look at the world, and that's how things tend to function, which is why, evidenced by people not wanting to ever go against the crowd or go against the mass, so to speak. And a great example of this was what happened in COVID. I actually was working on something earlier today just to drive it home because I saw some quote, I guess it was about Howard Stern, because it's been going around about how he's like lost his user base and probably going to get canceled. And but he had a pretty strong stance against anti-vax people back then, as did many celebrities and the media and politicians and leaders all across the board. So what I did was I put together a list of over 150 or so examples of just quotes of people being like blaming everything on the unvaccinated, or celebrating their death, or celebrating them losing their rights, celebrating them losing their job, calling for segregation, calling for concentration camps, all these things, right? And this is all documented. Anyone can go look back at this. So it's shocking. That's not shocking at all. It's surprising that people just forget it. And I've talked to people and they'll be like, no, that didn't happen. What are you talking about? No one ever said that. No, no one ever said that. And I was like, hold on. Here's a 30-minute compilation on YouTube of people saying it on the news every single night for years. So that was a great example of it. Because again, these are people who are compassionate, kind, empathetic, moral, upright, just society. They're all for the oppressed, body autonomy, body choice, body rights, uplifting people. They're for all these virtues, but then they throw them all out the window instantly because CNN said something, which is maybe the lead dog in that scenario. They bark and everyone's like, okay, this is what we're doing. This is what we're doing. Okay, got it. It just, that degree of flip is fascinating. And that's just a great example. I could list genuinely 25, 50 other examples where people do the exact same thing. I've done it in articles. I just haven't really posted them because I'm just like, how much conclusive, overwhelming evidence could I just stack up in one thing? Because I have this stuff in mind because I just sort of observe and watch and take note, but I can't necessarily recall every single example. So it's like you put it all out there like this, and it's just entertaining because you talk to people like, well, that never happened. No one ever said that. I never said that. Never said, oh, well, we didn't know. It's like, yeah, we did. You just chose not to. And again, there's so many things that happen. And the fact of the matter is, it will happen again. And then people will do the same thing again. And then they'll forget all the times that it happened before. And they'll act like it's brand new. And they'll act like, no, we're on the right side of it this time. No, it's true this time. And then like, dude, what does that say about you as a person? If you swallowed easily 100 lies that I could, in 5 minutes, piece together in an article, 100 lies that I guarantee you probably believe still, and then form a fundamental part of your identity, and you have no problem with it, and you ultimately just like dodge and deflect. Those are all no problem, right? But like, I make a post about illustrating a dynamic extremely clearly, that's obvious, that's genuinely maybe harming people, and then showing perhaps a better way, etc. And then all of a sudden, enemy number one, and all the like emotional ploys and fallacies and the animal reactivity comes out, and it's like, well, wait, that's so. Anyways, just trying to illustrate that point and drive home that if people really were the way that they thought and believed and hoped they were, then the world would be very different. But the fact that the world is kind of the way that it is and people are the way that they are sort of reveals things that I agree might be uncomfortable, might be unpleasant. But I think anyone who's done anything in life or is good at genuinely anything learns to embrace discomfort, and whatever capacity that might be. For example, if you need to lose weight, the most comfortable, loving, compassionate thing you could do for yourself, i.e. what feels good now, is just keep doing what you're doing. Maybe eating too much, eating the wrong things, being damp, being depressed, living in a bad environment, not exercising, not being active. Keep doing that, and that's going to feel the best. What's going to not feel the best is someone saying, here's all the things you're doing wrong. Here's the things that we need to change. Here's what we need to improve. Here's what we need to change. Here's how we can make some adjustments. And then you can lose all this weight and you'll feel a million times better. Then all of a sudden that guy's evil, or he's X, Y, and Z pejorative, or whatever other fill in the blank thing. When, if you actually look at reality, the opposite is true, because that will actually lead you to a much better, happier, more fulfilling place. If you take that at scale and on a bunch of individuals taken together as a group, then that would actually have a large effect on society in the world. But because of the institutional capture and the way things are programmed, people are programmed against their own best interest, basically. So yeah, I forgot where I was going with that, but started reading through the chat, got distracted. Oh yeah, my point was all what it was about. All of that was all of those examples and all those things sort of show and reveal the kind of character of that person, what that person is, um, which usually doesn't match what their image is. And one thing I've noticed across the board is usually the more exaggerated and inflated someone's self-image is, usually the more internally deficient they actually are. I've just seen that to be true time and time and time again. Because people that I've met in my life that are actually genuinely good at things, or maybe they're billionaires, or maybe they're geniuses, or maybe they're really skilled at some particular endeavor, usually their self-image and their attitude and these things is very minimal, and they're not really needing you to know all of these things. They're just kind of chill. Versus, the healer savior therapist complex, who's bought into the therapy industrial complex machine, needs you to know how progressive and compassionate they are. They need to post about Trump all day, every day. They need to post about all their political things. They need to have bumper stickers and signs up and go to marches and do all these things and, stand up for everything and do. But then when it comes to down to where the rubber actually hits the roads, where things actually make a difference, then they just default to infant. Oh my God, this hurts my feelings. Oh, it's violence. Oh, I'm unsafe. It's like, you're not unsafe. It's just you have no resilience or actual maturity. You're functioning like an infant, and you hear an idea that challenges your self-image, so you have a meltdown. You throw a temper tantrum. Rather than tossing things and, running around crying, they're being like, oh my God, you're so mean. You're so critical. You're so judgmental. Oh, you must be miserable. You must hate your mom. You must be lonely. You must be well, why do you care? What do you think about this? And it was like, no. But that just sort of demonstrates the point. And I know I'm using examples on one side of the spectrum, but the exact same thing is true if we start going to conservatives or people that are real into Jesus and really into the church, and really that's their self-image. Be like, well, I'm saved because some obese guy dunked my head in tap water while he was wearing some sort of dress thingy, and like now I'm saved because I put my head underwater. And they develop this image about it, and then usually oftentimes too those people can become very fragile. Because I've said things like this before, and I get the hateful comments from loving Christians, like, oh, you don't know, you're not saved, and you're this and you're that, and just this like whole guilt trip. And I'm like, no, because what I said is objectively true. You just got your head put in some water. That's it. I mean, that might be a meaningful ritual to you. You might place a lot of meaning onto it. And it could be very important and it means a lot to you, which is great. But it's just that. It's just that thing. But you can get into those people, or even the right-wing Trumper people, who will be equally as fragile oftentimes as your left sort of people. And then I've talked about it again before, a lot of the real spiritual people, again, they like these sort of escape hatches or lofty words that they hide behind that don't actually mean anything, but it gives them a sense of elevated identity, that they take the good feeling and then think, oh, it must be something higher. When in reality, it's the same exact thing of getting high, feeling good about your favorite sports team. It's the same thing. It's the same thing in the body. It's the same mechanisms. It's the same dynamics. It's the same cause and effect. It's just, instead of a yellow gold shirt, it's a black shirt. Instead of this ism, it's that ism. That's it. And I think honestly, a lot of times people are probably better off just doing the sports thing, because it doesn't come with all the heavy, grandiose psychological baggage and mental anxiety about, well, am I doing enough? Am I doing this? Am I doing that? Am I this? Am I that? I got to do this, got to do that, like all the, or the judgment of superiority of like, oh, well, I'm saved because I'm in this in group, and these people are saved and they don't know, and start being a bit evangelical. But it's ultimately just empty things. And I remember one time I figured this out probably about a decade ago. I had a friend in Portland, was a really intelligent person, successful, whatever, right? But then just would always sort of become zealotry Johnny One Note, where there wasn't actually much, there wasn't really much happening other than just people are dumb, I'm better than them. So I'm going to keep myself isolated and I hate everyone, but I'm better because I do yoga and I do these things that people think are weird. So I'm whatever. I'm thinking like, what? Okay. So then I remember one day I just kept being like, yeah, but what do you mean? Yeah, but what does that mean? But what are you actually talking about? And it just very quickly became literally a circular logic of nothing. And very quickly revealed that it was just really what it was is just like an emotional cop out from someone who was kind of depressed and isolated. And this was like their escape hatch of like, well, I'm a failure in these areas of life and I can't actually connect with people. So in order to maintain plausible deniability, it's not my fault. It's their fault because I do yoga and I've destroyed my body and I'm kind of anemic and have horrible posture and I've made myself hyper flaccid and I can't handle being in the world and everything's overwhelming and stressful. But that's because everything's wrong and the world sucks. It's not my fault. So my escape hatch is that, oh, well, I'm spiritual and it's just all about God and I'm just all about connecting with God and doing this. And then the reality is most of the time when they're meditating, they're just sleeping. They're just napping. They're just checking out. They're just numbing out. They think they're getting more chill, but they're just getting more numb. They're just numbing themselves out, which is, again, the reality of what's occurring, which you can easily observe if you look at someone. Because for people who genuinely are, let's say, building chi or genuinely connecting with spirit or God or genuinely cultivating something, that produces different results that are observable, verifiable, repeatable, and tangible over time. And when people are not, those results are also. So, okay, if they're not doing that thing, then you say, okay, well, what are they doing? Then you start looking and say, oh, well, actually, it's just this emotional sort of cul-de-sac that they're in. And sadly, that's going to be the relation. That's the rest of their life. So you might think, oh, this guy's an asshole. How could he say that? That's so mean. That's so harsh. What's worse, me saying these words that are true, or someone living the rest of their life 40, 50, 60 years alone, depressed, angry, sad, bitter, resentful? I would say that's worse. uh, and the only way that they will get out of that is by realizing what they're doing and why they're doing it, and then doing something differently. To me, I think that would be obvious, right? I would hope. That would be what I thought therapy should be doing for people, or what real spirituality or whatever that stuff would actually provide for people. But the fact of the matter is that's the exception rather than the norm. Usually it's just rearranging dysfunction under another escape hatch that allows people more plausible deniability and more self-image boost. Because I can tell you it's been 10 years and I guarantee you the person I'm talking about is still doing the same exact things, saying the same things, thinking the same things, eating the same things, same routine, same lifestyle, same beliefs, same relationship outcomes, same life outcomes. But they're able to do it because they're independently wealthy and don't have to actually interact with people or do anything with the world. So it's this self-fulfilling like doom loop. And to me, that's sad and unfortunate because call me a selfish, arrogant asshole, but I would prefer that people would be happy or have fulfilling relationships or live a life that's not so bitter and resentful and isolated from things. That's sort of my selfish, narcissistic, manipulative, evil plan or whatever. Like to me, that's what I would prefer to see, prefer to hear from people, and that's what I would prefer for myself if we have a choice in the matter, which it seems like we do in some cases. So if there's a bunch of stuff that we could do that just gets in the way of it, what about just not doing those things that get in the way of it? Which sort of leads to the next point that I wanted to go over, that it could be helpful to clarify. basically, I think one thing that happens a lot if people watch videos or listen to what I'm talking about, it appears that a lot of it is in the negative, right? Or a lot of it is, people will reduce it down to like the most distorted, simplistic version of like, you just think you're better than everyone else and you're just talking shit and you're just pointing out blah, 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 blah. I'm like, well, actually, there's kind of a lot more to it than that. But I guess all that went over your head, or that went out the window, and we're just doing like caricatures of things. Okay. But I want to explain that, and I want to clarify that because I think it's important. My approach and my maybe incorrect assumption is that I would hope people are adults, right? So I would hope that I could speak to them as such, because the alternatives, and I think sometimes what people want, is to be spoken to like a kindergartner. A lot of validation, a lot of soft coddling, and ultimately no real challenge. And just soft coddling, warm language, validation, done. And I think that's what a lot of people think spirituality and these things should be. That's what they think it is. But that's genuinely not the case. Why is that not the case? Is because any endeavor that humans engage within where they're trying to improve or change something is based on some degree of discomfort and failure. Because if you never do those things, you never improve. Like, just imagine going to piano lesson on day one and being like, dang, I got this. No, if you actually want to get good at a skill, you have to realize that you're not good at that skill. You have to be willing to look yourself in the mirror and take an honest account of your strengths and weaknesses and what you need to focus on and what you need to do and how you need to do it, and then do it. That's with any skill, any capacity in human life. That's universal. So therefore, if I converse or talk about things, that's my baseline understanding. Firstly, that hopefully people are actually adults, so I don't have to endlessly coddle them or endlessly sort of be like a kindergarten teacher. Because number one, that's not really my personality anyways. That's not how I really function. So why are you going to come to me for that? Because that's never going to happen, really. There's plenty of other people that will do that if that's what you need. It's like, I wouldn't go to McDonald's and be mad they don't carry Wagyu beef. That would be odd. Or I wouldn't go to a fine dining restaurant and be mad when they don't have mac and cheese. That would be odd. That would be a user problem, not a provider problem. So that's really my mindset. So the other thing is, I'm not interested in doing the emotional labor for people, because I don't think that's honest, true, or fair. And I think a lot of people want to outsource, again, what we were talking about earlier in the chat. People want to outsource their authority. They want to outsource their life. They want someone else to be responsible. Why? So they can have plausible deniability. Meaning, if this other person's responsible for how I feel, when things go right, I can still kind of take credit for it, or I can glaze them up and feel good about that. But also, more importantly, when things, if they go wrong or fail, I can blame them, and it's not on me, it's all on them. And that's a mindset for failure. Doesn't matter what context it is, really. That is a mindset for failure, because that's how toddlers and teenagers and children think. That's not how adults think or function. So whether it's in relationships, whether it's in business or creativity or career or learning a skill, that's a fairly universal truth. So that's my assumption, and that's sort of how I operate. Why? Because it's actually true. If I were to come on and start trying to be emotionally responsible for people or process things for them or act like I'm some expert or some priest coming down on high, it's fundamentally, that's not true. So it's already going to be disempowering. So it's going to create a lot of bullshit and a lot of extra work and a lot of extra nonsense for ultimately no real gain. Versus if I just stick with what's true, actually, which is I'm a person, check. I'm alive, check. It's YouTube, check. I've had experiences and thought things, check. I can explain and reiterate them and share them with people, check. That's all true. present it in such a way that it maintains the structural integrity of all of those things which are true, check, and then just say, like, here's what I think, here's how I got here, here's why I think it's important, here's some examples so you can maybe understand what I'm talking about. That's all true, check. And then really beyond that, trust people to be adults and make informed decisions. Because if people actually care, if something is actually important to them, they'll invest the time and the energy to do something about it. Versus a lot of people don't care, so they want to outsource their authority to someone else, or they want just coddled, or they just want validated, or they want to feel things now, which again is, it's free will, it's prerogative, do whatever you want. I'm just saying, like, there's plenty of other places to do that better than here. But just don't get butt hurt at me when I'm not providing these things, just like I wouldn't go to McDonald's and be like, you don't have Wagyu. But I'm just sharing this because that's my mindset. So speaking in the negative, it's not actually negative, because again, let's just use the example I was talking about with my friend earlier. What's worse? What's more mean? What's more harsh? What's, in the grand scheme of the life, what's worse? Me saying things that are obviously true about this person and their life, and or them living the rest of their life, and for a bulk of it being really dissatisfied, isolated, and unhappy and alone ultimately, I would say that's worse. So, and that goes for a lot of things, whether it's me making videos talking about people making errors in psychedelics or self-help or spirituality. In my opinion, that's actually really nice, because if I'm learning something new and someone can tell me, here's all the potholes, here's all the dead-end cul-de-sacs that you'll probably go down, because we'll all probably go around them, because we're all human. I'm human, you're human, hopefully, unless we're just all AI bots out here. But that's all true. So if someone can say, well, if you skip these potholes and focus on this, it'll probably be more efficient. Great. Just save me a lot of time or energy. And then if they can lay out the map of how they got there, how they look at it, how they think, how they approach it, that's even more useful, because now I don't have to reinvent the wheel. Now I have a map. Now I have something that I can try for myself. I'm not going to just guzzle it blindly and be some zealot for it, but I'll take it into account and be like, okay, let me see what this is. And that's called efficiency. That's called saving a lot of time and energy. And the other component of that is that when I have had mentors, that's how they functioned. They weren't there to necessarily coddle me or just endlessly validate me, or, give me a little warm bath, or be like a kindergarten teacher. They're just like, okay, look, here's the deal. Blah, 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 blah. Okay. I'm like, all right, thanks. You treated me like an adult. You spoke to me like an adult. Maybe I don't feel that way. Maybe I'm not there. Maybe there's a big deficit between the two of us, or maybe there's a deficit between where I am and what I want to be. But at least that's like something to orientate towards. That's a new point of reference. That's a new sort of background process I can run in my run in the process, or run in the background to lead somewhere. So hopefully that adds some clarity and context, because I would hope people are adults and they don't want to be talked to like infants. They don't want to be endlessly coddled, and they don't want to just be emotionally, they just want novelty all the time. Or just they don't want someone else to do the emotional processing or hard work for them. And I think, unfortunately, as it goes back to this whole thing about plausible deniability, unfortunately, this is all intertwined. And it comes down to sometimes just people not wanting to stand on their own 2 feet. They want someone else to do everything for them, whether it's an authority or a teacher or whatever. But ultimately, every person's life is their own, right? And there's a certain vulnerability in that. There's a certain degree of risk. There's a certain fear in that, of course, but then there's all the other positive things that can come about as well. But I think people, again, want to avoid that and then stay in the safe maybe, but never actually really say anything or stand for anything or do anything or risk anything. And to me, that's sad. So the fact that I could say something like that or make a video and certain people get really butthurt and try to make me a villain, okay, fine. But if one or two or however many people, or maybe only just one, could hear that and actually apply something and go in a different direction, then that's worthwhile. But also too, that has nothing to do with me, because why? It's their decision and their choice. So that's why I don't really care so much either way. Obviously, I told you my preference for how I would like things to go, but ultimately there's nothing real to grab onto there to really care about, unless it's just trying to stroke some ego nonsense, which I don't really have any interest in, because it's just not true and it's a waste of time and energy. Because ultimately, yeah, there's just nothing to it if you actually just think it through, which I think is sometimes very overlooked. Noodle says, speaking in the negative should eventually lead to a question of, so what is it then? Sorry to turn my heater back on. Speaking in the positive will only bring up other people's experiences, and they say, oh, it's like that. Yeah, I mean, speaking in the negative like that, yeah, so if they're in the loop, they'll just relate to it from the loop. Yeah, exactly. Speaking in the negative, I think, is frustrating for people who just want to be told what to do. Just tell me, what should I do? And it's like, well, I did just tell you what to do. I made 700 videos and I talked an hour on the podcast and told you what to do. But they're like, yeah, but just tell me what to do. Like, yeah, I did. Go back and listen. So I think that would, I guess it just goes back to also too, again, if someone shows like, here's the potholes, then what is it you kind of have to figure out for yourself, because that leads to, like you said, should lead to a question, which on the negative side will just reveal people and keep them in a loop. But on the flip side, asking that question oftentimes and sometimes can get out of the loop if they're actually open-minded. Because it's like, well, wait, I thought it was all these things, but it isn't. So what is it? And then if people are actually interested and engaged, or they genuinely do care, then that can perhaps lead them on their own exploration or whatever. I don't know what you would want to call that, but I can just tell you, for me personally, that's oftentimes how I was taught, or how people were mentors towards me. And it's partially, again, how we would differentiate teaching infants versus teaching adults, and just the basic mechanics of any kind of adult endeavor. Which I wrote something about that as well. I just want to see if I can find it, but probably not. I need to get better at organizing my stuff. To be honest, I keep looking for things and I can't find it. Oh, here we go. Found it. So another thing that I think is important to really mention, because I think mostly everyone would, be like, view themselves as honest or respectful, right? So sometimes why people will be like, oh, why aren't you just more positive? Why are things so negative, et cetera? Why don't you just say nice things? Why can't you just be happy? Why can't you just make people feel good, et cetera? And my first thought is like, that's an odd question to ask another adult, first and foremost, because outside of preschool or kindergarten, almost all learning experiences worth having aren't built on being endlessly praised. They're built on constructively engaging with reality. So the adult to adult standard, which is when I talk to another adult, I would assume they're capable of hearing the truth without shattering, looking at what's effective and ineffective in making adjustments, or choosing strategies that actually work, rather than clinging to ones that feel nice but actually fail in the real world. To me, that's actually respect, because it's trying to offer a structure and a framework and a clear map, which of course in the short term, yeah, can create discomfort, but ultimately in the medium and long term can create a lot of things that are not discomfort, which is always odd when it's like in a self-help therapy, spirituality, internal art sort of things, right? Which the pretense of that is growth, change, improvement, help, etc., right? But then they will do that, but then expect things to just be endlessly validating. Like they'll say they want growth, but then exclude anything that doesn't feel like immediate validation. So then that will initiate the like, you're so mean reflex. So someone hears a video or reads a thing and then they translate it through their like basic discomfort filter, and then it comes out their reflexive labeling of, oh, harsh, critical, mean, judgmental, arrogant, fill in the blank, and even worse terms. But ultimately they're mistaking clarity for something else aside from clarity. They're reacting not to what's said, but to like the contrast that it makes with their self-image, which also tends to validate the thesis in the first place. And naming patterns is not attacking people. It's very different. It's not just being mean. It's not being harsh. It's just literally naming patterns and dynamics in a pretty sort of depersonalized way that's still relatable, but it's about patterns, not people, because I fundamentally believe that pretty much everyone is good. They're trying their best and they trying to achieve some outcome or trying to fix something, or they're trying to, feel something or belong, or, the list of just baseline things about how we all function. That's the assumption, because most of the time that's just true for most people that you'll pretty much ever meet in your life. But I mean, maybe that's just me. Maybe I've been lucky, but mostly anyone that I've ever met and come in contact with in the real world has been cool, or at least polite and okay to deal with the vast majority of the time. So in essence, at a certain point, if people are getting emotionally reactive or butthurt, it's probably because there's truth in that. Because like I said, if I'm like, oh, the moon is made of cheese, no one cares. Or if I'm hanging out with, libtards and I'm like, yeah, Trump's evil, great. Flip side, if I'm hanging out with maggots and republicards, and I'm like, oh, Biden's decline and their commies are taking over, things of these nature. Again, no issue with it whatsoever. Why? Because it validates their image. It may or may not be true, and those are dumb examples. I could come up with a dozen other things that I could say that actually aren't true, but they believe, and makes them look and feel good, so they're okay with it. But objectively, it's not true. It's not consistent. It's not intellectually honest. It's not really true at all. But they're okay with it because of the feeling associated with it, which is what I'm trying to get at here. Because the strange part about all of this is that, especially within those arenas, these people give lip service to like lofty ideals. Life is a gift. People are amazing. Love and compassion are the answer, and all these sorts of things. And it's like, if that's true, if you really believe people are amazing, then wouldn't you want to interact with them as capable beings? Wouldn't you want to engage with life as it is and not like some Hallmark card fantasy? Because to me, that's dishonest and disrespectful if you would do those things. Or if you'll just be emotionally reactive and butthurt, but not actually realize that it's what you're doing and try to put it off on someone else. Because I think putting your emotional reactivity onto another person is disrespectful. It's dishonest. And when people get really good at it and they use their therapy language and their spiritual language and they use all their little clever toolboxes, frankly, I think that's pretty disgusting. I think that's a revolting, very unattractive, very unappealing personality character trait that I think is very defective and very destructive. And if people do that once or so, maybe I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. But once it becomes clear that maybe that's a pattern, or it's their default mode, then I will usually not give them any more attention, because they've demonstrated they are not a rational actor, and they're instead some sort of ideological zealot robot thing that's functioning at the level of a toddler. So that's just a kind of a waste of time and energy for everyone involved. Because people think honesty is the opposite of compassion, but in reality, it's pretty intertwined. And you can't have respect without truth. You can't have maturity without reality. You can't have genuine love without all of those things intertwined. So that's also where it gets confusing, is they're like, oh, they're about these lofty ideals, but they avoid the qualities which lead to those ideals, like the plague, which seems very odd. And the fact of the matter is, the civilization in the world that we have inherited, that we lived in, that we're standing in, the things that we're doing right now, were built on the very traits that a lot of people seem to be allergic to: pattern recognition, problem solving, critical thinking, logic and reason, structure and systems. Those qualities aren't harsh, they're not cold, they're not mean, they're not all the sort of emotional reactivity things. They're the literal engines of human progress. But these days, when it's applied to social or emotional life or so many other issues, now people are like, oh, that's mean, oh, that's negative, oh, that's judgmental, oh, you're fill in the blank. But I think actually the opposite is true. I think actually those qualities are what allowed us to get here. And it's weird to try to just abandon them because, I don't know, of some institutional capture. And I think, just as a personal preference, I don't think I'll ever be choosing to cosplay as compassion or choosing to cosplay as spiritual or whatever other nonsense people do. Because for one, we're all human, so that's just true. And I would just rather see things as clear as I can, as best I can, for what I see, how I see it, and why I think it matters. Just because I'd rather engage with reality as it is. But otherwise, it seems like the herd and a lot of people just want to join the chorus of people who want love without truth, growth without discomfort, and progress without honesty. And that's literally just theater. That's just cosplay. And it just doesn't work. So that's why I just get a little bit of head scratching from time to time. So anyways, I just wanted to go on that because I had an article written about that I actually was able to find, so I could reiterate that to some degree. And yeah, that's all I have for me talking, because my brain's starting to fry. And I'll be done with talking. Let's see, I'm going to scroll up to the chat, see if I missed anything. Thanks for answering my question. Just trying to sort through things. Therapy didn't help me much. Been watching you for 16 years. That's insane. That's a long time. But yeah, if you have any more specific questions or anything more pointed, I'll be happy to chime in. Feel free to drop it in there. Stern he's not canceled. They won't give him the money he wants, and his contract is ending. He's old, and I don't think he cares. Yeah, I mean, that's splitting hairs, but I get what you mean. He's not being canceled because of some outrage. He's just not having his contract renewed because his numbers are apparently a minuscule fraction of what they used to be, allegedly. But either way, I think he already had like a $500 million contract or something crazy. So at that point, yeah, who really cares at that point if you got that kind of money? Who would you want to run for president in the U.S.? No comment. People forget we are one in total. Spirit comes from one. Many leaders push ideas that we accept and give ourselves names to. We are products in a sense. We follow what they say, matrix-like. Yeah, there's a lot of truth to that. Yeah, certainly. I don't know that oneness is really a useful term. I think it's kind of a hazy, fuzzy cop-out thing that people do. It's also not really a thing, at least in this sort of thing. And yeah, like perhaps we all do come from one big unified spirit, and when we die, we return back to it. That's cool. But that's not what we're doing right now. Like if I'm thirsty and I have this water in front of me, I could just not drink it because I'm like, well, we're all one spirit, and ultimately I'm coming from blah 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 blah, and I'm a divine being, have a human experience, not vice versa, etc., etc. But at the end of the day, it's not particularly that helpful or useful if I'm thirsty. So that's kind of the way I look at it. More, it's a bit more pragmatic, and rather than lofty sort of terminology like that, which has certainly some truth to it, of course. But I think sometimes it's also just like an emotional cop out. Like I was saying earlier about my friend, of like, oh, life's uncomfortable, but I have the escape hatch of, well, I'm spiritual because I have this idea about things. But then if you actually really press the idea, you can't really do anything with it. You can't produce anything from it. You can't really do a lot other than just it makes you feel good temporarily. But maybe that's has its own utility. But one of those to each their own sort of thing. Do you recommend hobbies, or do you think they're stupid? No, I mean, hobbies are cool. I'm burning and huffing some high-grade Chiara as this thing is occurring, so I would classify that as a bit of a hobby. So yeah, I mean, I think if you're going to enjoy your life and do things and be interested in things and explore, sounds fun. Just assuming your hobby isn't like boofing ayahuasca or something. I would say that might be a stupid hobby, but to each their own, right? People think incense and tea is a stupid hobby, so whatever. But yeah, I think it's probably a good thing. But yeah, if there's not really any other questions and such, then I'll probably gonna get off here because I'm hungry and my brain's starting to dwindle down. Yep. Well, thanks for everyone that tuned in. Hopefully there was some useful stuff in here. I think that framework and that idea that I was sharing in many ways over the course of the whole thing is very, very, very impactful. Something that people could apply and integrate pretty closely. And I think there's a lot to it. And I think earlier someone said spirituality has just become a way for people to virtue signal, and I would agree. It's just another way to appear one way, but actually be a different way. Whether it's because I sort of put pop spirituality in with the same doom loop of therapy, psychedelics, dating apps, social media, and pop spirituality. It's like one doom loop, and people tend to do therapy for a while, and then that doesn't really quite get it done. So they're like, oh, I need to go deeper. Maybe they do some plant medicines, etc. Then they get to their pop spirituality. Then they get their social media algorithms that start just validating and giving them that hyper normality and sort of tunnel vision. Then maybe they pop on dating apps and try to be like, oh, I got to find someone that's my tribe and that's on my level, and da-da-da-da. That doesn't work, or it's a failure, or some relationship falls apart. So then repeat the cycle: therapy, drugs, psychedelics, therapy, drugs, psychedelics, spirituality, social media. And I think that's leading a lot of people in the absolute wrong direction, and their health is falling apart, their life, their relationships, things of this nature are not going in a positive direction. And it just is creating its own sort of really superficial economy. I would say the alternative is not doing those things. If I said drinking cyanide was bad, what's the alternative? Just don't drink poison. Or the alternative would be perhaps the last 90 minutes of the live stream. Or the alternative would be any number of the 1,000 videos or so on the channel, I would say. Or the alternative would be sit down, figure out what you actually want, what you're actually trying to achieve, get a little bit clear on what you're doing, what you want, what you're trying to achieve, and why. And then think about what's going to be the most direct manner of doing that. That's, I would say, the alternative. Or do an honest assessment of where you've experienced struggle and conflict, and perhaps where you feel you have shortcomings. Maybe it's relationships, maybe it's social skills. Okay, then how do you improve your social skills? That's a whole thing. So then you just start improving your social skills. Or communication, you can't communicate, do that. Or you're overweight and out of shape. Okay, then improve, exercise, change your diet, things of that nature. But don't necessarily think that humans are that complicated in life. Is really that. What if life doesn't have a purpose, though? Well, I would say in your case in particular, I would recommend being able to stay on topic and getting your life and your mind more structured and more orderly, and less like that, to be able to do this. That's what I would say would be a very helpful, useful, beneficial alternative. And being able to actually focus on something, and not just like if I pick up this water and I want to drink it, before I drink it, I stop and I go for a run, and then I come back and be like, oh, I was going to drink this water. Oh, wait, no, I got to do the laundry. That would be problematic. And I could say pretty much there's a pretty clear pattern between your questions over multiple live streams that question, answer, whole other thing, answer, whole other thing, answer. So I would also maybe recommend rewatching the 90 minutes here. That could be a good thing. But I guess the other thing is, what if life doesn't have a purpose, though? Why does it need to? I mean, what is... If it doesn't have a purpose, then give it one. How about that? Choose one for yourself. Find something that interests you. Find something that is meaningful. Find something that's attractive. Find something that's interesting, inspiring, and just follow that. Follow that interest. Follow that desire. Follow that passion. Follow something. See where it goes. And be willing to stand on your own 2 feet as a functional adult and make decisions for yourself and sort of go on an adventure, because you're alive. It's an opportunity. Some would call it a gift. Some would call it a blessing. Some would call it a curse, because let's face it, sometimes life is really unfair. But you're here, and eventually one day you will not be here. So why not do something while you're here? And I don't know. That's what I would say. And that's also things that I told myself and still do, and still, think about, because we're all human and things don't... We're different in some ways, but in some ways we're very similar. And the human condition is something that people figured out a long time ago and mapped out a long time ago and sort of sorted out a long time ago. It's not particularly that mysterious or crazy. It's just maybe we are confused or don't have the right information. So anyways, appreciate your question and for watching and such. But yeah, a bit longer than I was expecting, but hopefully there's some good stuff in here. And yeah, I guess I'll go. There's no more questions. And yeah, hopefully you enjoy the rest of your day wherever you are on the planet. Hopefully there's something useful in here. And if you came in late, I'd recommend rewatching it, or you could just read the description that I posted, which is in essence like an article that's overviewing really everything I talked about. So it's TLDR version. But anyways, hope you're doing well. And again, appreciate you tuning in and for watching and listening and checking out the videos. If there's anything, questions about anything or whatever, you can drop them in the comments or reach out to me. And yeah, I'll see you in the next one.